but the first Splatoon brushes are these blocking brushes. Now, as I've looked and stared at the official art style for a really long time, I've been developing these brushes for a year now. And there's been like 3 different variations that I've gone over. So you can see here, this is a good example of this sort of, what do I call it, pixelated texture. So you can see here, but then as you go along, there's sort of this bumpy texture here, which I've really never seen before. The brush that they used is very unique. So this took me a while to figure out how to replicate, but eventually I managed to make a brush that has both that uh, jitter and has this sort of bumpy edge. So the one thing that I can, how you would replicate this is going over it in a large brush. I assumed that this was more of like a larger stroke that they did for the tentacle. And then they went smaller on the edges here. And then here, as you can see, it sort of smooths out. I'm assuming this was corrected with a smaller version of the brush. So that's how I am guessing that they managed to block out their sketches. And I think as the brush gets bigger, it has more of this jitter edge. Because you can see in these really large brush strokes in the background with the shadows and larger objects, it gets more ridges. So there's the second blocking brush also, since in case you want to use this one, it has sort of the similar thing, but it's got more texture along the edge. So it's not as accurate to the original style as the other one, but it's a little bit easier to use it on angles than a round brush. And I just really like square brushes, so it's pretty much the same thing but square.
seeing you paint over the picture that's already there, it looks close. These would be pretty good at replicating.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. So this next one is a little bit difficult to explain, so I'll try and replicate this little isopod here. My guess on how the Splatoon artist paints is that they paint in large blocks like this. And then this one's probably, that looks like that gray color, or maybe pinkish. And as it goes along, they have this really rough blocking thing, so maybe they'll do the eyes like blobs here. This is actually the closest. When I saw this, I realized that the shape of the brush is probably an oval like this, because you can see how the brush got really small, and instead of doing a singular stroke, the artist did 1, 2, 3, 4 little daubs of paint, which suddenly gave me a really good indicator of what their brush actually looks like. I spent too much time analyzing this, can you tell?
Well, that's how you get good brushes.
So just rough colors.
That's a
So
bit in chat anyway.
this is not perfect, but I think this is probably close to the way that they would have blocked this sketch out. So then this just looks like a normal blob. So, but if I wanted to come back and refine any of these shapes, I created this really harsh texture brush. So you can go back over your shapes if you want to. If you're like, oh wait, I didn't like how I did that, you're gonna have to make your blocking brush a lot smaller, and you'll lose that nice edge to it. So I created this texture brush so you can go back over and correct any shape mistakes you have, but then you'll still keep that harsh look that the art style is supposed to have. Okay, the next 2 brushes are, I feel like, don't match the style very well, but I added them in there because they could be useful. So this one is just a soft shading brush. So like for example here on I don't know what this animal is called. You can see how the color goes sort of this it blends into this shadow right here. So that's just a soft blending brush. I named all of these. So the blocking brush are called blocks. This hard texture brush is named accordingly. Brushes that have soft on them have a flow. If you go into your settings, you can see that it has a flow all the way up, so the edges of the brush are going to be very soft, and so they'll blend nicely into other colors. And this one is the same thing. Um, this style is very harsh, and because of that, you need harsher brushes. But I did notice that, especially in this picture where there's a lot of transparency, like there's bubbles and there's this fish with an outer skin that's translucent. I would use it for this. I would just, if I wanted to add like an outer thing to this isopod here, I just draw over it with this brush, and then that's it. But it'll start to look too soft, and as you can see, there isn't really any like soft blending here. It's a harsh transfer from one color to another with some texture. That's pretty much how this works. So the brush that you will be using next, most prominently, is this one. In Photoshop, and I'll have to figure out how to replicate this at CSP, you can change the blending mode of your brush to paint directly on an image. You can also just create another layer and paint on top of it with a multiply or overlay mode. Now, the Splatoon artist really does all of their lighting and shading with an overlay. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we'll get a darker color, and I'll come in here and I'll start painting over it, and you can already see how similar this is starting to look to the official style. It's got that sort of overlay color, and the colors are sort of smashing into each other as I start to lay over it. And I think that's just pretty much what they do. Now, it's going to be difficult to get the exact colors correct that they used. Takes a little bit more practice, I've found, of getting these light pastel colors. But color picking directly from an official reference is probably the fastest way to learn how to do this. So already you can see this was just a blob a minute ago, and it already has a lot of depth and shading. Okay, texture brush. And I don't like how soft it is, so I'll go back over it with the harder texture brush.
I think of like a grainy texture.
Yeah.
Kind of spongy.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And if I don't like how soft my brush is, there's a way to change the opacity. The opacity is what's really making this brush look soft. So you can turn that up so that it gets a harsher look. And I also will be going over the brushes in CSP, so I'll show you how to do that as well. So there you go. Just in a couple attempts, I've managed to replicate this little boy.
looks so good.
And now I'm gonna strike a random color through it.
Love that.
Actually, probably be.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
I liked it. Cool. Okay,
Well,
let's compare this Cali art
Official.
to my Cali art. So mine's a little bit brighter, and there's definitely more time spent on this one, I would say. I was really rushing, but it is
Right.
fairly similar. Yeah, there's more detail on how they spread out the colors here, but I have to say it looks pretty stinking close.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like texturing and
Yeah.
shaping it with the brushes, it's pretty much perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look past the other stuff, like obviously you took a game model, whereas their 2D proportions tend to change. I've noticed.